The pediatric ward reminded me of a squad bay at boot camp on Parris Island. It was one long, beige-colored room with at least 20 beds lined up in bays along the perimeter. But most of the beds here didn't look like regular beds. They looked like metal cages. There was an occasional hospital bed for an older child, but the toddlers and babies were kept in metal cribs. Some even had metal tops to keep active toddlers from escaping. "They're not going to put Zach in one of these, are they?" I whispered to Neil. A group of nurses and other medical professionals moved in and out of the nurses' station in the center of the room. A nurse with dark brown hair looked up and smiled. She grabbed a clipboard and approached us. "Are you the Meonis?" she asked, looking down at her clipboard. "Yes," I said. "They just called up to say Zach will be here soon. I'll show you where his bed is." She led us to a bay on the right side of the room. 2 plastic chairs faced an empty metal crib. Folded against the wall was a beige metal lamp attached to a long metal arm. A monochrome monitor waited to be hooked up. The tiled floors and beige walls made the room feel sterile. The smell of rubbing alcohol lingered in the air. "You can sit here and wait," she said. "It won't be long." But I didn't sit. I wanted to see what was going on. Despite the size of the ward and the number of people in it, everything was quiet and calm. Nobody screamed in pain. Nurses didn't have to hurry to get to anybody. Parents held small children in their arms and swayed back and forth. A little boy wearing faded hospital pajamas and breathing into a nebulizer lay in the bed next to us. "It's going to be okay," I reassured myself. "If they send kids here who only need an inhaler, how bad could it be for Zach?" Neil sat down on the hard chair and buried his head in his hands. "I can't believe this happened." I wanted to comfort him, but I wasn't sure how. He seemed confused. I sat down in the chair next to him as he repeated to himself, "How does this happen? How does this happen?" One of the differences between Neil and me was our faith in God. My relationship with Jesus gave me strength, but Neil didn't have that kind of relationship. He had grown up in a Catholic family, but he rarely went to church anymore. At the most desperate times in my life, like now, I could turn to my faith, but Neil couldn't. I stared at the empty metal crib and whispered my prayers. "What's going on? Please help us, God. Give us strength. Heal Zachary." An orderly came in and rolled away the metal crib. That gave me hope. They're putting Zach into a real bed. But minutes later, the orderly brought the crib back with Zach inside, and my hope turned to fear. I understood why they needed to put him in the crib, but compared to his sweet blue and white crib in our apartment, this looked like a torture device, complete with tubes and wires. As they rolled him into place, I heard Zach making a sound he'd never made before. It was like a horrible moan that came from somewhere deep inside. I immediately went over to him, but there were so many medical people working around his bed, I couldn't get close enough to touch him. One nurse was hanging a bag of IV fluid. Another nurse had unscrewed his oxygen line from the tank and was plugging it into the wall. Yet another was checking his vital signs, while a fourth stood at the end of his crib, recording numbers. BP, pulse, oxygen. Zach was wearing only a diaper. He'd never looked so small and frail. His head looked too big, much larger than it had at the clinic just a few hours earlier. A red light attached to his toe reported oxygen levels, and his mattress was elevated so his head was higher than his feet. He continued to make that horrible moaning sound, and every part of my body strained to stop his pain and comfort him. I'd never felt so helpless. Several of the nurses finished and left his bedside, so I moved in closer to get a better look at my dark-haired little boy. I reached through the metal slats and rubbed his foot. There was no response, just more of those hideous moans. One of the nurses remained. Her name tag read Remy. She lowered the metal slats on one side of the bed. "You'll be able to see him better this way," she said. "You can touch him, but you can't pick him up. He's too fragile." Zach's visceral groaning continued. Neil remained seated. I leaned over Zach's bed and rubbed his face and kissed him. Remy asked me to take a step back so she could change one of his tubes. As I waited, I caught a glimpse through the window. Outside, I saw the overpass where two highways merged together and watched as cars and trucks zoomed by without slowing down. I wanted to scream, "Stop! Everybody just stop! Something is terribly wrong with my son." My world was spinning out of control, and I needed help. So I turned to the only one I knew who could take care of things. I prayed out loud, not caring who heard me. "God, you've got to step in here. He's so sick." Then I heard Remy's voice. He's starting again. I turned back to see Zach's right pinky finger beginning to shake, and then I watched as his face began to twitch. Nurses who had left his bedside came running. No one had to tell me what was happening. I already knew. Just like his father so many times before, Zach was having a grand mal seizure. That phone call from Neil on September 6th, 1989, turned my life upside down. But it wasn't the first life-changing call in my life, and it wouldn't be the last. There were literal phone calls that delivered unexpected and sometimes unimaginable news. There were also metaphorical calls that challenged me to go in unexpected and sometimes unimaginable directions. And every call brought with it a choice. Even as a scared 22-year-old, staring at my baby's convulsing body and the nurses who were trying to help him, I knew I had to choose. I could step up and do my best in the situation, or I could sit back and let life's circumstances take me out. I can't say I've always done the right thing, but I can honestly say that when the calls came, I've done my very best to stand up and answer. There have been a lot of surprises in my life, but one thing has always held true. God has always been one call away.